The sound of the grand oak door closing behind her was not a gentle click, but a final, resonant thud that seemed to shake the very foundations of the marble foyer. It was the sound of a life being severed. Alara stood on the top step of the Kensington mansion, the morning mist clinging to her worn wool coat, her trembling hands clenched around the handle of a single, cheap suitcase. Inside it was everything she owned, everything she was. The dismissal had been swift, surgical, and utterly public. Liam Kensington had not even been standing when he delivered the verdict. He'd been seated at the head of the 12-foot dining table, a slab of polished ebony that cost more than Alara's entire childhood neighborhood. The scent of his single-origin coffee and the buttery croissant he hadn't touched filled the space between them. Mrs. Higgins, the head housekeeper, had been hovering by the sideboard, her face a mask of strained neutrality. Two junior assistants, all sharp suits and sharper eyes, had flanked Liam, tablets in hand, recording his every word as if it were corporate scripture. "Your services are no longer required, Alara," Liam had said, his voice devoid of inflection, a flat line of authority. He didn't look at her. He was reviewing a financial report on his phone. "Effective immediately." Alara's breath had frozen in her lungs. The world had narrowed to the cold glint of the silverware, the dizzying pattern of the Persian rug, the distant, happy squeal of his 5-year-old daughter, Sophie, from the upstairs playroom. "Mr. Kensington, sir, I don't understand. Is it about yesterday? Sophie's fall in the park was just a scraped knee, It's not about a single incident," he interrupted, finally looking up. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, swept over her and she felt transparent, insignificant. "It's about a misalignment of standards. This household operates on a principle of excellence, of discretion. Recent observations suggest a lapse." Observations. The word was a weapon. It meant nothing and everything. It was the gossiping of the new security guard she'd politely declined a date from. It was the way she sometimes sang old, folkloric lullabies to Sophie that weren't in the approved cognitive development playlist. It was her simple, thrift store cardigan amidst their bespoke silks and cashmeres. It was her humanity, and in this world of curated perfection, it was a lapse. "Sophie," Alara whispered, her voice cracking, Can I say goodbye to her?" "That won't be necessary," Liam stated, his tone leaving no room for appeal. "It would only cause her unnecessary distress. Your final payment, including a severance, has been processed. Mrs. Higgins will see you out." He returned his gaze to his phone, the conversation already a deleted file in his mind. The dismissal was complete. The two assistants shared a glance, a flicker of something that might have been pity or perhaps just professional satisfaction at a task efficiently executed. Mrs. Higgins had stepped forward, her expression pained but obedient. "This way, Alara," she'd murmured, unable to meet her eyes. And now here she was outside. The massive door, carved with the Kensington family crest, a lion and a laurel wreath, was shut. A fortress she was no longer permitted to enter. The London rain began to fall, a fine, cold drizzle that matched the temperature inside her chest. She looked down at her suitcase, a cheap, wheeled thing that had seen too many bus stations and desperate hopes. This was all she had to show for 2 years of her life. 2 years of loving a child who wasn't hers, of tending to a house that wasn't a home, of trying to find a sliver of warmth in the glacial heart of Liam Kensington. She took a step, then another, her legs feeling like lead. The gravel of the driveway crunched under her feet, each sound a punctuation mark in the sentence of her failure. Now pause for a second. What would you do if someone tore away your livelihood, your purpose, your connection to a child you loved as your own just because they could? What do you do when your dignity is handed back to you like a rejected application, crumpled and worthless? Do you scream? Do you fight? Or do you just stand in the rain, wondering how you'll find the strength to take one more step? Alara didn't scream. She didn't fight. She walked, one foot in front of the other, down the endless driveway, away from the gilded cage, the weight of her suitcase and her heart threatening to pull her to the ground. The rain was falling harder now, a steady drumbeat against the window pane of Alara's tiny bedsit in a part of London the Kensingtons would never see. The room was barely larger than Sophie's walk-in closet, but it was hers. Or at least, it was until the end of the month, when the meager severance from Liam Kensington ran out. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed, a single faded photograph in her hands. It was of her and Arthur Kensington, Liam's father. It had been taken in the sprawling gardens of the estate just 6 months ago. Arthur was in his wheelchair, a tartan blanket across his lap despite the summer warmth, his face a roadmap of kindness and age. Alara was crouched beside him, both of them laughing at something he just said. The sun was dappling through the oak trees, catching the silver in his hair and the genuine warmth in her smile. She hadn't come to the Kensingtons through a high-end agency. She'd come through desperation. 2 years ago, her life had been a different kind of unraveling. Her mother, her only family, had finally lost her long, brutal fight with cancer. The medical bills had swallowed their savings, their small flat, every dream Alara had ever cautiously nurtured. She'd been working double shifts at a cafe, her hands permanently stained with coffee grounds, her spirit frayed thin with grief and exhaustion. The interview had been with Arthur. Liam, then deep in a hostile takeover of a rival conglomerate, had delegated the hearing of domestic staff to his father, a task he considered beneath him. Arthur had received her not in the intimidating study but in the sun-drenched conservatory, surrounded by the orchids he still tended to with a shaky hand. He hadn't asked for references first. He asked her about her mother. He asked what songs she used to sing to her. And Alara, disarmed by the gentle curiosity in his faded blue eyes, had told him. She spoken of her mother's love of old folk songs, of her resilience, of the small, fierce dignity she'd maintained even in the darkest days. Arthur had listened, truly listened, his gnarled fingers steepled under his chin. "My son," he'd said finally, a wistful sadness in his voice, "believes that excellence is a metric, a number on a balance sheet. He has forgotten that the most excellent thing a person can be is kind. Can you be kind, Alara, to a lonely old man? And to a little girl who is growing up in a house that sometimes feels more like a museum?" The question had undone her. She'd simply nodded, tears she'd been holding back for months welling in her eyes. "Good," Arthur had said, his own eyes twinkling. "The job is yours, the pay will be fair, but more importantly, you will be treated with respect in this house. That is my promise to you." And for a time it was true. Arthur was her anchor. He was the one who'd insisted she join them for dinner when Liam was away, who defended her lullabies to his son, calling them the music of real people. He saw her, not as staff, but as a person, a friend. And then there was Sophie, a bright, sensitive child who clung to Alara's warmth in the cold, structured world her father had built. Alara was the one who comforted her after nightmares, who knew that she was afraid of the shadow the grandfather clock made on her wall, who tucked the worn corner of her blue blanket just so under her chin. She was the one who taught her how to make daisy chains and to see animal shapes in the clouds. In the silent, perfect prison of the Kensington mansion, Alara and Sophie had built a secret garden of their own, a place of messy, beautiful, unconditional love. But Liam saw that love not as a gift to his daughter, but as a variable he couldn't control, a deviation from the plan. Sometimes the ones who look down on you, who see your kindness as a currency they can devalue, forget others are watching too. They forget that legacy isn't just about wealth and power, it's about the footprints you leave on a human heart. And Arthur Kensington was always watching. Alara traced the outline of Arthur's smiling face in the photograph. He had been her protector, but he was old, he was frail, and in the ruthless ecosystem of the Kensington Empire, his gentle authority was being slowly, systematically eclipsed by his son's cold ambition. Liam Kensington stood before the floor-to-ceiling window of his corner office on the 40th floor of the Kensington Global Tower. London sprawled beneath him like a conquered kingdom, its lights twinkling in the evening haze. This was his domain, a world of glass, steel, and absolute control. The dismissal of the nanny was already a forgotten item on a mental checklist, filed away between a contentious board meeting and a call with the Singapore investors. It had been a necessary recalibration. He'd observed the way Sophie had started to mimic Alara's soft, lilting accent, the way she'd once cried for Lara instead of him after a bad dream. It was an emotional dependency that was inefficient, unproductive. His father didn't understand. Arthur spoke of heart and soul as if they were tangible assets, but Liam knew the truth. The world was a brutal competitive arena. Sentiment was a vulnerability. Love was a liability. His own mother had taught him that lesson before she'd walked out on them when he was 10, choosing a life of freedom in Capri over the stifling duty of the Kensington name. The only thing that was real, the only thing that couldn't betray you was power, control. His phone buzzed, a discreet pulse against the polished mahogany of his desk. His personal assistant. "Sir, your father's nurse is on the line. She says it's urgent." A flicker of something, annoyance, concern, passed through him. His father's health had been a slow, declining graph for years. Another variable he tried to manage with the best doctors, the most advanced treatments. But it was a battle against an enemy he couldn't intimidate, couldn't acquire. Mortality. He picked up the phone. Yes. The nurse's voice was tense, professional, but with an undercurrent of genuine distress. "Mr. Kensington, it's your father. He's had another stroke, a massive one. The medics are with him now, but it's not good, sir. You should come home immediately." The city lights below him seemed to blur for a moment. Home. The word felt alien. The mansion was just another asset. But his father, Arthur, was the last tether to a different version of himself, a version that had once believed in things like kindness, a version that had been left behind in the ruthless climb to the top. "I'm on my way," he said, his voice betraying nothing. The drive home was a silent, high-speed affair in the back of his armored Bentley. He stared out at the passing streets, not seeing them. He thought of his father's face when he'd told him he was letting Alara go. The old man had been sitting in his library, a first edition of Dickens open on his lap. "You've made a mistake, Liam," Arthur had said, his voice quiet but firm, a tremor of more than just age in it. "It was a personnel decision, father, one I am best positioned to make. She is the best thing that has happened to Sophie since her mother left. She is a light in this house, and you've extinguished it." Arthur had closed his book with a soft, final thud. "You are so busy building an empire, my boy, that you are forgetting to build a life. And without a life, an empire is just a beautiful, empty tomb." Liam had dismissed it as the rambling of a sentimental old man. But the words echoed in the silent car now, taking on a new, ominous weight. When he arrived at the mansion, it was too late. The silence in his father's bedroom was deafening. The medical equipment had been switched off. The doctor spoke in hushed, respectful tones, but Liam heard none of it. He stood in the doorway, looking at the still form of his father in the large four-poster bed. The lion of the Kensington Empire, reduced to a quiet shell. The man who had built this world from almost nothing, who had taught Liam everything about business and he'd thought nothing about life, was gone. And in that moment, standing in the profound silence, Liam Kensington, the man who controlled billions, felt a terrifying, unfamiliar sensation. The complete and utter loss of control. The reading of the will was held a week later in the very same library where Arthur had chastised his son. The room was heavy with the scent of old leather and beeswax, and the silence was a living entity. Rain streaked the leaded windows, casting watery, shifting patterns on the Persian rug. Liam sat in a high-backed leather chair, the air apparent, his posture rigid, his expression a mask of composed grief. He was flanked by his corporate lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Mr. Aldridge, and the family's longtime solicitor, Mr. Thistlethwaite, a kind-eyed man in his 70s who had been Arthur's friend for 50 years. The rest of the room was filled with vultures in suits, board members, distant cousins, key executives, all there to hear how the great Arthur Kensington had divided his spoils. They sipped the expensive whiskey his father had loved, their eyes darting around the room, calculating their share. Mr. Thistlethwaite stood before the fireplace, a single thick document in his hands. His voice was calm, measured as he began with the smaller bequests, endowments to his favorite charities, generous trusts for loyal staff. Mrs. Higgins received a sum that made her gasp softly into her handkerchief, a collection of first editions to the British Library. Liam listened, impatient. These were formalities. The main event was the disposition of Kensington Global and the majority stake, the controlling interest, the legacy. And to my grandson, in spirit if not in blood, Thistlethwaite continued, his eyes scanning the room and landing on no one in particular, I leave my vintage watch collection, in the hope that he learns that the most precious thing we have is time. Liam gave a barely perceptible nod, a sentimental gesture, fine. Thistlethwaite cleared his throat. The air in the room tightened. Now, to the matter of the residuary estate, which comprises my entire shareholding in Kensington Global, my properties, including the Kensington Manor and the London residence, and all remaining assets and liquid capital. Liam leaned forward slightly. This was it, the moment the crown was formally placed upon his head. Mr. Thistlethwaite adjusted his glasses. He read the words slowly, deliberately, as if to ensure every syllable landed with its full, seismic force. I, Arthur Alastair Kensington, being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath the entirety of my residuary estate, including all shares, properties, and assets, in perpetuity, to Alara Vance. For a moment there was no sound but the rain against the window. Then the room erupted. It was a chaos of disbelief, of choked exclamations, of chairs scraping back. Liam stared at Thistlethwaite, his brain refusing to process the words. It was a mistake, a misreading, a cruel, elaborate joke. What? The word tore from Liam's throat, raw and stripped of its usual authority. Mr. Thistlethwaite met his gaze, his expression unreadable. The will is clear, Liam. Your father left everything to Miss Alara Vance. The asterisk Nanny, the word was a venomous whisper. The woman I fired, this is insanity. She manipulated him. She preyed on a sick old man. He was on his feet now, his composure shattered, his face a mask of fury and utter shock. I'll contest this. This will won't stand for a minute in any court in this country. Thistlethwaite remained infuriatingly calm. The will has been thoroughly vetted. It is ironclad. Arthur was of perfectly sound mind when he executed this document just 3 weeks ago. He was, in fact, remarkably clear-headed. He anticipated your reaction. The old solicitor looked down at the document again. He includes a personal message for you, Liam. The room fell silent once more, every ear straining. To my son, Liam, Thistlethwaite read, his voice echoing in the stunned silence. You were given every tool to build a legacy of wealth, and you have succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. But you were also given every opportunity to build a legacy of character, and in that you have failed catastrophically. You see people as instruments. You mistook Alara's kindness for weakness, her integrity for simplicity. A company, a fortune, a name, these are not a legacy. They are just things. A true legacy is the good you leave behind in the hearts of others. Alara understands that. She knows the value of a lullaby, the strength in silence, the dignity in compassion. She will be the custodian of our name now. She will protect what is truly important. I have given her the tools. I trust her with the heart. Perhaps, in time, she can teach you what I could not. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a world inverting. Liam Kensington, one of the most powerful men in England, had just been disinherited. And the woman he had cast out into the rain, the woman he had deemed unworthy, was now the sole owner of his empire, his home, his very birthright. Sometimes the ones you step on, the ones you dismiss as beneath your notice, are the very ones chosen to rise. The question is never about their worth. It's about your blindness. What happens when the foundation of your entire reality is not just shaken but utterly demolished? Do you rebuild, or do you lie amidst the rubble? The cameras flashed as Liam stumbled out of the manor, his face pale, his world in ruins. The news was already spreading like a wildfire, a scandal of epic proportions. The Kensington nanny, the billionaire heiress. Across the city in her small, damp room, Alara's phone began to ring, and ring, and ring. The phone would not stop ringing. It was an alien, insistent sound in the quiet of Alara's bedsit, cutting through the hum of the tiny refrigerator and the distant, constant sigh of London traffic. She stared at it where it lay on her rickety nightstand, its screen lit up with a number she didn't recognize. Then another, and another. Texts began to ping through, a staccato burst of bewildered congratulations and frantic requests for comment. She had ignored the world for a week, wrapped in a cocoon of grief for Arthur and a dull, aching worry for Sophie. The silence from the Kensington household had been absolute, a confirmation of her exile. She'd assumed Liam had instructed everyone to treat her as a non-person, a ghost. Now her phone was a haunted object, possessed by a reality she couldn't comprehend. Finally, a call came through from a number she knew, Mr. Thistlethwaite. "Alara," his voice was calm, a lifeboat in a churning sea. "I need you to listen carefully, and you must not say a word to anyone else until we speak. Are you sitting down?" The story he told her was so fantastical, so utterly removed from the realm of any possibility she had ever imagined that she felt the room tilt. The will, the inheritance, everything, the company, the houses, the money. It was a tidal wave of nouns that meant nothing and everything all at once. She heard the words, but they were like stones dropped into a deep, dark well. She heard the splash but couldn't see the bottom. "There's been a reading of the will," Thistlethwaite said gently. "Arthur left it all to you. He believed in you, Alara. He trusted you with his entire legacy." To me, the words were a dry whisper. But why Liam Sophie? Liam has been disinherited. The message Arthur left for him was unequivocal. As for Sophie, Arthur's love for her is implicit in his choice. He believed you were the best guardian for her future in every sense. She hung up the phone, her hand trembling so violently she nearly dropped it. She looked around the small, shabby room, the peeling wallpaper, the single bare bulb, the suitcase still packed by the door. This was her life. This was her reality. The other world, the world of Kensington Manor and billion-pound corporations, was a dream she had been ejected from. And now she was being told she owned the dream, that she was the dream. A part of her, a small, wounded part that had been shamed and cast out, felt a fierce, hot surge of vindication. He saw me. Arthur saw me. But it was quickly drowned by a tsunami of pure, undiluted terror. What did she know about running a company, about managing wealth? She was a nanny from a council estate. This wasn't a gift. It was a crucifixion by responsibility. If life handed you absolute power over the person who once held absolute power over you, what would you feel? Triumph? A thirst for revenge? Or would a colder, more terrifying feeling settle in your stomach, the weight of a destiny you never asked for? The next 48 hours were a blur of controlled chaos orchestrated by Mr. Thistlethwaite. He arrived at her bedsit with a discreet security detail, whisking her away to a quiet, anonymous hotel suite. The press, he explained, had descended on her building like a pack of wolves. The story was the fuel of tabloid dreams. Cinderella nanny in billion-pound will shock. CEO dumped for the help. Liam Kensington's face was on every front page, his expression a frozen mask of shock and fury. Her own photo, a grainy image lifted from her old agency profile, was plastered beside his. The narrative was being written without her. The cunning gold digger, the manipulative siren who had bewitched a dying old man. Meanwhile, Liam's world was atomizing. The board of Kensington Global, a collection of sharks who had tolerated him only because of his success and his birthright, now smelled blood in the water. An emergency meeting was called, from which he was pointedly excluded. His key allies, men who had laughed at his jokes and praised his vision, were suddenly unavailable for comment. The stock price plummeted in pre-market trading, a numeric representation of his collapsing credibility. He sat in the study of the London mansion, asterisk her asterisk mansion now, a fact that made his stomach clench, staring at the portrait of his father above the fireplace. The old man's painted eyes seemed to hold a profound disappointment, a final, posthumous judgment. "Why," he whispered to the empty room, the word ragged. "I built what you started, I made us stronger, I did it all for this family." But the words echoed back at him hollow. Had he? Or had he done it for the roar of the crowd, for the thrill of the wind, for the sheer, addictive high of control? He thought of Alara's face in the dining room, the quiet dignity in her eyes as he dismissed her. He had seen it as weakness. His father had seen it as strength. Aldridge, his lawyer, was packing, his phone glued to his ear. "We'll contest, Liam. Undue influence, lack of capacity. We'll tie it up in courts for years. She'll never see a penny." "He left a message, Aldridge," Liam said, his voice flat. "He knew what he was doing. He wanted to teach me a lesson." "It's a lesson that will bankrupt you," Aldridge snapped. "Your personal assets are significant, but they're a fraction of the trust funds tied to the company shares. Without the controlling interest, you're just another minority shareholder. The board will vote you out as CEO by the end of the week. You'll be a pariah." The door to the study opened and Mrs. Higgins stood there, her usual composure gone. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "Sir, Miss Vance, Alara is here, with Mr. Thistlethwaite." Liam shot to his feet. "Here, she dares to come here." "She said," Mrs. Higgins swallowed, "she said she'd like to speak with you, and she asked if she could see Sophie." The air crackled with a new, more personal kind of lightning. The audacity, the sheer, breathtaking audacity, to come to his home, the home she had stolen, and ask for his daughter. He stormed into the grand foyer, the same space where he had dismissed her just weeks before. The scene was a bizarre mirror of that day. But this time, the power dynamic had been violently upended. Alara stood near the door, Mr. Thistlethwaite a protective presence beside her. She looked different. It wasn't her clothes. She still wore her simple, inexpensive coat. It was her posture. The slight, self-effacing stoop was gone. She stood straight, her chin level, her gaze clear and steady. She met his eyes without flinching, without malice, but without submission either. "Get out," Liam snarled, his voice low and dangerous. "Liam, that is no way to speak to the majority shareholder of your company and the owner of this property," Thistlethwaite said, his tone mild but firm. The words were a physical blow. Liam ignored him, his fury focused entirely on Alara. You scheming, manipulative bitch. What did you do to him? What promises did you make? What lies did you tell?" Alara took a small, steadying breath. The grandeur of the foyer, the familiar scent of lemon polish and old money was overwhelming, but she held her ground. This was not for her. This was for Arthur, for Sophie. "I told him no lies, Liam," she said, her voice quiet but carrying in the vast space. "I only ever showed him who I was, the same person I showed you. And you expect me to believe that my father, a titan of industry, left his life's work to a nanny out of the goodness of his heart? Don't be naive. Or do you think I am?" "I think you're a man who has just lost his father," she said, and the unexpected compassion in her tone disarmed him for a second. "And I think you're hurting, but this is what Arthur wanted. I didn't ask for it. I don't even know if I want it, but I will not disrespect his wishes." "His wishes," Liam laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "His wishes were to destroy his own son, to hand over everything he built to a stranger." "He didn't see me as a stranger," Alara replied. "And he wasn't trying to destroy you. He was trying to save you." "From what?" "From yourself." The silence stretched between them, taut and electric. Liam could see the staff hovering in the doorways, watching the scene unfold. He was losing. He was losing in his own home in front of his own people. "You will not see Sophie," he said, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "I will fight you with every penny I have left. I will drag you through every court. I will make sure the world knows exactly what you are." Ilara's gaze never wavered. "The world will know what Arthur wanted it to know. And as for Sophie, she's not a pawn in this, Liam. She's a little girl who just lost her grandfather. She needs stability. She needs love. She needs her father." "Does she?" Ilara asked, and the question was so soft, so devoid of accusation that it cut deeper than any shout. It was the question Arthur had asked him 100 times in 100 different ways. "Are you present, Liam? Are you really there?" She turned to leave, then paused, looking back at him. The anger had drained from his face, leaving behind a raw, bewildered pain that was far more unsettling. "I'm not your enemy, Liam," she said. "I never was." She walked out of the mansion, the heavy door closing behind her with the same final thud as before. But this time, she was on the other side by choice. This time, she held the key. Liam stood alone in the cavernous foyer, the eyes of his staff upon him. The portrait of his father seemed to loom larger. He had never felt more powerful, nor more utterly powerless. He had built an empire, but in the process, he had lost the faith of his father, the trust of his daughter's caretaker, and now, the very bricks and mortar of his identity. And the woman he had fired, the woman he had considered beneath his notice, was now the one holding the deed to his ruin. When the ground falls away beneath your feet, what is left? When the titles are stripped and the wealth is gone, what remains of a man? Is it the ambition that drove him, or the humanity he sacrificed along the way? The fall is only the beginning. The real question is what you find in the rubble. The boardroom of Kensington Global was a temple to Liam's reign. A 30-foot table of polished black granite, walls of screens displaying real-time data from across the globe, a view that surveyed all of London. He had always felt like a god here. Today, he felt like a prisoner in the dock. He sat at the head of the table, but the authority of the position was a ghost. The other board members, men like Charles Holloway, whose loyalty was as reliable as the stock ticker, and Rebecca Storm, whose ambition was a cold, hard flame, avoided his eyes. The seat at the far end, the one that had been his father, and then empty as a tribute, was now occupied by Ilara Vance. She looked impossibly small and out of place. She wore a simple, dark dress that was a world away from the power suits surrounding her. Mr. Thistlethwaite sat beside her, a calm, ancient guardian. She had accepted the directorship, as was her right as the majority shareholder. This was her first board meeting. "The motion on the floor," Holloway said, his voice devoid of emotion, "is a vote of no confidence in Liam Kensington as Chief Executive Officer. Given the unprecedented change in ownership structure and the significant volatility it has introduced, the board feels new leadership is required to stabilize the company." Liam's knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the table. "This company is where it is because of my leadership. Our profits are up 180% under my watch." "The stock is down 30% since the news of the will broke," Rebecca Storm countered, her voice crisp. "Our investors are nervous. The Kensington name is becoming a laughingstock. Stability, Liam, is what we need now, not drama." All eyes flickered to Ilara. She had been silent, her hands folded in her lap, observing. She felt like an imposter, a child who had wandered onto a stage during a serious play. The language they used was alien. Leverage, liquidity, hostile takeovers. She understood the emotions, though. The greed in Holloway's eyes, the cold calculation in Storm's, the desperation in Liam. "Miss Vance," Holloway said, turning to her, "as the primary shareholder, your perspective is, of course, paramount." Liam watched her, a part of him hoping she would stumble, would reveal her ignorance, would prove his father wrong. Ilara looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes. She saw the way they looked at her, not as a leader but as an anomaly, a problem to be managed. "I don't know much about running a company," she began, her voice quiet but clear. A few of the members exchanged smug glances. "Here it comes. But I knew Arthur Kensington. I know what he valued. He valued people. He valued loyalty. He built this company not just on smart deals but on his word." She paused, her gaze settling on Liam. "He told me that once a handshake was enough, because trust was the most valuable asset of all." She looked back at the board. "I've read the proposals. The layoffs in the Newcastle plant to boost the next quarter's numbers. The cutting of the employee pension fund. The withdrawal of funding from the children's charity Arthur founded. These are the actions you think will bring stability." Rebecca Storm leaned forward. "Miss Vance, with all due respect, these are necessary strategic cuts. The market demands efficiency." "The market," Alara repeated softly. "Arthur used to say the market was just a crowd of people, all scared and all hopping. He said leading wasn't about following the crowd. It was about giving them something to believe in." She took a breath. "I vote against the motion. Liam Kensington remains CEO." The room erupted. Liam stared at her, utterly dumbfounded. It was the last thing he had expected. It was a stay of execution from the one person he was sure would wield the axe. "This is insanity," Holloway spluttered. "You're jeopardizing the entire company on a whim." "No," Ilara said, her voice gaining a new strength. "I'm honoring a legacy. My first act as majority shareholder is not to tear down but to rebuild. The cuts are rejected. We will find another way." She stood up, the gesture somehow commanding a silence. "This meeting is adjourned." She walked out of the boardroom, Thistlethwaite following her, leaving a room full of stunned, furious, and confused titans of industry in her wake. Liam found her in the hallway, by the bank of elevators. "Why?" he asked, the single word loaded with a complexity of emotions: gratitude, suspicion, utter confusion. Alara pressed the button for the elevator. She didn't look at him. "Because firing you wouldn't bring stability, it would just be revenge. And Arthur didn't leave me this company to get revenge. He left it to me to make it better." The elevator doors pinged open. She finally turned to him. "Don't make me regret this, Liam. Prove him right. Prove that there's more to you than just the win." She stepped into the elevator and the doors closed, leaving him alone in the plush, silent hallway. He leaned back against the wall, his mind reeling. She had saved him. She had seen the wolves circling and she had called them off. Not out of weakness, not out of a desire for his approval, but out of a strength he couldn't fathom, a strength rooted in a belief in his father's dream, a belief that he, Liam, could be more than he was. For the first time in his adult life, Liam Kensington felt the unsettling, terrifying, and exhilarating sensation of being given a second chance. And he had been given it by the last person on earth he would have ever expected. The war was far from over. The board would rebel. The market would test her. He would test her. But the battle lines had been redrawn. It was no longer Liam versus Alara. It was the past versus a possible future. And he was no longer sure which side he was on. The silence in the penthouse was no longer peaceful. It was accusatory. Liam stood at the same floor-to-ceiling window, but the conquered kingdom below now felt like a taunt. Every light was a reminder of an asset he no longer controlled, a decision that required an approval stamp from the woman whose trembling hands he had watched carry a suitcase down his driveway. Alara's vote in the boardroom had not been a rescue. It felt like a more profound humiliation. She hadn't just beaten him, she had pardoned him. The power dynamic was now so perverse it made his head spin. He was the CEO in name, but every strategic move, every hire, every financial commitment over a certain threshold now required the sign-off of the former nanny. He was a king, but she held the crown, and she had just demonstrated she could place it on his head or dash it to the ground on a whim. His phone buzzed. Rebecca Storm. He let it go to voicemail. He knew what she would say, that he was compromised. that he was now the puppet of a sentimental novice who would run the company into the ground with her misguided charity. Part of him, the part forged in the fire of Wall Street and boardroom coups, agreed with her. He poured a finger of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the city's glow. He replayed the board meeting in his mind. It wasn't her defiance that haunted him, it was her calm. When she'd spoken of his father, it wasn't with the sycophantic reverence of an employee. It was with the quiet certainty of a fellow believer. She had known a version of Arthur Kensington that Liam had only ever seen in faded childhood memories. A man who told stories by the fire, who valued a person's word over their credit rating. A soft knock pulled him from his thoughts. Mrs. Higgins stood at the door to his study, her face etched with a new, permanent worry. "Sir, it's Sophie. She's asking for Alara again. She won't settle. The new nanny, it's just not working." The new nanny was a highly recommended, impeccably credentialed woman from a top agency. She had charts for developmental milestones and a degree in child psychology. She did not know that Sophie was afraid of the grandfather clock's shadow. Liam felt a surge of irrational anger. She needs to adjust. Tell her to go to sleep. Mrs. Higgins didn't move. "It's been weeks, sir. She's a little girl. She's lost her grandfather, and now the one constant in her life has vanished. She doesn't understand corporate takeovers or wills." She hesitated, then added softly, "Perhaps a short visit, for Sophie's sake." "Out of the question," Liam snapped. Using his daughter as a bargaining chip, as a bridge to asterisk her asterisk, was a line he would not cross. To give in would be to acknowledge that Alara was not just his financial overlord, but an emotional one too. That she held the key to his daughter's heart as surely as she held the deed to his company. But as Mrs. Higgins retreated, the silence felt heavier. The whiskey tasted like ash. He was protecting Sophie from what, exactly? From the one person who had shown her unconditional love. The ghost of his father's message echoed in the room. "You are so busy building an empire, my boy, that you are forgetting to build a life." He was failing, as a CEO, as a son, and now, palpably, as a father. Across the city, in a spacious, temporary apartment Mr. Thistlethwaite had secured for her, Alara was trying to build a new life from the shattered pieces of her old one. The space was elegant and anonymous, a world away from her bedsit, but it felt like a gilded cage. She was a figurehead, a symbol. The Cinderella nanny the press loved to mythologize. She spent her days in a whirlwind of tutorials. Finance, corporate law, corporate governance. It was like trying to drink from a fire hose. The more she learned, the more terrifying the responsibility felt. She wasn't just managing a fortune. She was the steward of thousands of jobs, of pensions, of families. Arthur's belief in her felt less like an honor and more like a terrifying burden. Mr. Thistlethwaite was her rock. "You don't need to become an expert in a week, my dear," he said, watching her pore over a dense report about Asian market fluctuations. "You need to learn enough to know who to trust." Arthur's greatest skill was not his business acumen, it was his ability to read character. He saw yours. Now you must learn to see it in others. Her first test came sooner than expected. A delegation from the Newcastle plant, the one slated for layoffs, requested a meeting. They didn't go through the official channels. They had found her through an old article and reached out to her public email address. Liam got wind of it immediately. He stormed into the small office Thistlethwaite had set up for her adjacent to the boardroom. "You will not meet with them," he stated, his voice tight with controlled fury. "It undermines the entire chain of command. It tells every disgruntled employee they can end-run their direct supervisors and come crying to the fairy godmother." Alara looked up from her laptop. She had been reading about the plant. It was profitable, but less so than the newer facilities in Eastern Europe. The proposed layoffs were a cold, hard numbers game. "They're not disgruntled," she said calmly. "They're scared. They have families. That plant has been part of their community for 50 years. Your father opened it." "My father also knew when to close a chapter." Sentiment doesn't pay shareholders, Alara. Efficiency does. You stopping the cuts in the boardroom was a nice gesture, but it's not a strategy. We need a strategy, not a sob story. What's the strategy for the human cost, Liam? She asked, her gaze unwavering. What's the line item on the balance sheet for a broken community? For the children of those workers who now have to move away? Arthur told me about a foreman there, Joe Mabry. He's been with the company for 40 years. He taught your father about manufacturing tolerances. Is his loyalty just a liability now? Liam stared at her, frustrated. She spoke a language he understood on an intellectual level, loyalty, legacy, but she applied it with a moral absolutism that was commercially reckless. This is not a charity, Alara. It's a corporation with a fiduciary responsibility. And I am the fiduciary, she replied, her voice gaining a steel he hadn't heard before. And my responsibility, as I see it, is to the long-term health of this company, not just the next quarterly report. A reputation for heartlessness has a cost, too. I'm meeting with them. The meeting was held in a small conference room. 3 men in their best suits, their hands calloused, their faces etched with an anxiety that no board member could ever truly comprehend. They called her Miss Vance, their respect tinged with a desperate hope. She listened. She didn't interrupt. She heard about their mortgages, their children in local schools, the small businesses in Newcastle that relied on the plant. She heard about an idea they had, a proposal for retooling the factory to produce a new, specialized component, an idea that had been dismissed by middle management as too speculative. When they finished, there was a long silence. Elara looked at their proposals, at the passion in their eyes. It was a risk, a big one. I can't promise you anything, she said finally. But I promise you this. I will have our best people look at this retooling proposal, properly. Not with the goal of finding reasons to say no, but with the goal of finding a way to make it work. You have my word. It wasn't a salvation, but it was a chance. The relief on their faces was a tangible thing. They thanked her, their voices thick with emotion. As they left, Liam, who had been observing from the doorway, shook his head. You've given them hope. That's a dangerous currency. If it doesn't work out, the fall will be twice as hard. Hope is the only currency that ever really matters, Liam, she said, gathering her papers. You can't build a future without it. Later that night, alone in her apartment, the bravado faded and the doubt crept in. Had she been naive? Was she, as Rebecca Storm no doubt believed, a foolish woman playing with forces she didn't understand, destined to wreck Arthur's legacy with her good intentions? Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Her heart leapt, a foolish, fleeting hope that it was Liam, that some bridge had been built. It was a photo, a slightly blurry, close-up picture of a child's drawing. It was of 2 stick figures and a smaller one, holding hands under a lopsided sun. One of the taller figures had a mass of brown scribbled hair. The other had a briefcase. The small one was holding the hand of the brown-haired figure tightly. At the bottom, in wobbly capitals, it read, I miss you, Lara. It was from Mrs. Higgins. Alara's breath caught in her throat. The tears she had been holding back for weeks, through the shock, the legal battles, the boardroom confrontations, finally came. They were silent, wrenching sobs for the little girl she loved, for the man who had believed in her, for the impossible position she now found herself in. She was the majority shareholder of a global empire, but all she wanted was to be back in a nursery, tucking a little girl into bed. What is the weight of a legacy? Is it measured in billions or in the love of a child? Is it found in boardroom victories or in the quiet gratitude of men who have given their lives to a company? When you are given everything, what do you discover you truly wanted all along? The journey is just beginning, and the path is paved with impossible choices. The following week, the report on the Newcastle proposal landed on her desk and Liam simultaneously. The initial assessment from the efficiency experts was grim. The retooling cost was high, the market for the new component was unproven, the timeline was long, The numbers, in black and white, screamed no asterisk. Liam brought it to her himself, a faint, grim satisfaction in his eyes. It was the "I told you so" he didn't need to voice. "The data is clear," he said, placing the report in front of her. "It's not viable." Ilara didn't look at the summary. She looked at the appendices, at the market research the team from Newcastle had included, research their direct managers had dismissed. She saw a different story, a growing niche market, a lack of quality suppliers, a potential for Kensington Global to be a first mover. "The data is clear if your only goal is short-term profit maximization," she said, meeting his gaze. "But what about long-term brand positioning? What about owning an emerging market? What about the morale of every other employee who sees us fight for them?" "We can't run a company on whatabouts," Liam countered, his patience thinning. "This is a business, not a social experiment." "Everything is a social experiment, Liam," she fired back, standing up. "The way you treat your lowest-paid employee is just as much a part of your brand as your flagship product. Arthur knew that. It's why people were loyal to him, not just to his company." "My father is dead, Ilara." The words exploded from him, raw and painful. "His way was a different time. This is now. And in the now, this proposal is a financial black hole." The air crackled between them. It was the first time he had acknowledged his grief so openly, and it hung in the room like a shroud. Ilara's voice softened. "Then find a way to make it work. You're the brilliant CEO, you're the strategist. You turned this company into a powerhouse. So strategize, find the middle ground. Don't just tell me why it can't be done. Tell me how it can asterisk." She was no longer the quiet nanny or the overwhelmed heiress. She was a leader, issuing a challenge. She was throwing his own supposed genius back in his face. Liam was speechless. She wasn't just vetoing him. She was demanding he be better. She was asking him to solve a problem he had already written off, to prove that his much-vaunted intelligence could be applied to something more humane than gutting a factory. He looked at her, truly looked at her, standing there in the soft light of the office, her jaw set, her eyes blazing with a conviction that was both infuriating and magnetic. She wasn't just the custodian of his father's fortune. She was the custodian of his father's conscience. He picked up the report, his knuckles white. "I'll have my team look at it again," he said, the words tasting foreign. It was not a surrender. It was a reluctant, first, tiny step onto a bridge he had sworn he would never cross. As he walked out, Ilara sank back into her chair, her heart pounding. She had stood up to him, not with the power of her shares, but with the power of an idea he had once scorned. And for the first time since reading the will, she felt a flicker of something that wasn't fear. It felt like purpose. The confrontation came not in a boardroom or a mansion, but in the one place that had always been a sanctuary, Arthur's old study in the London house. Liam stood before the empty fireplace, the portrait of his father gazing down, its judgment now a constant, aching presence. The Newcastle deal was finalized. He had, against every instinct, found a way. A public-private partnership, phased retooling, shared risk. It was a masterpiece of creative compromise, a solution that balanced compassion with commercial sense, and it was entirely his. Yet the victory felt hollow. The praise from the board was for the numbers, not the principle. They saw a clever CEO who had averted a PR disaster. They didn't see a man who had, for the first time, valued something more than the bottom line. The door opened softly. Ilara stood there, back in the house that was legally hers, but she carried the deed not like a conqueror, but like a pilgrim. "The Newcastle team called," she said, her voice quiet in the hushed room. "They wanted me to thank you, personally." Liam didn't turn. "They should be thanking you. You forced my hand." "No," she said, stepping fully into the room. The scent of old books and Arthur's favorite pipe tobacco still lingered. "I didn't force you, I asked you. And you delivered. You proved that excellence and ethics aren't mutually exclusive. You proved your father right." He finally turned to face her. The arrogance was gone, the cold fury had burned itself out. What remained was a raw, exhausted honesty. The fall had stripped him bare. Why did he do it, Alara? The question was a plea. Why did he choose you? Was it just to punish me? Alara walked to the old leather armchair where Arthur had spent his final afternoons. She ran a hand over its worn arm. He wasn't punishing you, Liam. He was protecting what he loved. He loved this company. He loved Sophie. And in his last days, he loved me, I think, for the simple, uncomplicated love I gave to both. She looked at him, her eyes clear and deep. He didn't choose me over you. He chose the version of you he still believed was in there. The one who could build a life, not just an empire. He gave me the tools because he trusted my heart. He was betting that I could help you find yours. The truth of it landed with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't a disinheritance. It was the most brutal, desperate, and loving intervention a father could stage from beyond the grave. Arthur hadn't left his empire to a stranger. He had left it to a bridge. Liam's shoulders slumped. The fight went out of him, leaving behind a profound, shuddering relief. I have spent my entire life trying to be a man he would be proud of, and all I did was become everything he feared. It's not too late, Alara whispered. He looked at her then, really looked at her. Not as the nanny, not as the heiress, but as Alara. The woman who had shown his daughter more tenderness than he ever had. The woman who had faced his wrath with unbreakable dignity. The woman who had seen the crumbling man behind the CEO and had not looked away in disgust, but had reached out a hand. I am sorry, Alara, he said, the words unfamiliar on his tongue but tasting of freedom. For the way I treated you, for my arrogance, for my blindness. You were never the enemy. You were the only one who was ever truly on my father's side, on Sophie's side. Alara felt the final wall around her own heart crumble. She saw not Liam Kensington, the tycoon, but a lost, lonely man finally coming home. I know, she said softly. They stood in the quiet study, the ghosts of the past finally settling, making room for a future. 12 months later. The sunlight streamed through the large, airy windows of the Viola Davy Foundation's main community room, a converted warehouse in the heart of a neighborhood that had once known only struggle. The air hummed not with the tense silence of corporate intrigue, but with the vibrant, chaotic music of life. Children's laughter echoed from a newly equipped play area, while in a corner, a group of single mothers attended a financial literacy workshop led by a kindly, retired bank manager. Alara stood at the center of it, but not apart from it. She wasn't a CEO here, she was Miss Alara. She wore a simple, paint-splattered smock over her jeans, helping a little boy finish a lopsided clay pot. The Viola Davy Foundation, named for her mother, was her life's work, funded by the Kensington dividends but built with her own 2 hands. It was a place of dignity, of choice, of empowerment, just as she had promised Arthur she would do. She never moved into the Kensington mansions. She and Liam had come to a different arrangement. She kept her upgraded flat in her old neighborhood, a place that kept her grounded. The London mansion was now more of a home, its halls filled with Sophie's laughter and the smell of real food, not just polished perfection. The country estate had been turned into a retreat for foster children and a sanctuary for the company's long-serving employees. Liam still ran Kensington Global, but the man in the CEO's office was not the man who had fired her. He worked 3 days a week from a small, unassuming office in the foundation, his strategic mind now applied to social impact investing and sustainable business models. He had found that the challenges here, the human puzzles, were far more rewarding than any hostile takeover. He walked into the community room now, having just come from a board meeting. He traded his Brioni suit for a simple sweater and chinos. In his arms, cradled with a tenderness that still surprised him, was their daughter. Not his. Theirs. A little girl just 6 months old with a head of dark, curling hair and her mother's calm, observant eyes. Alara looked up and saw them. A smile, warm and unguarded, spread across her face. She walked over, wiping her clay-stained hands on her smock. Look at her, Alara whispered, taking the baby, who cooed and nestled against her chest. She doesn't even know how much she changed everything. Liam stepped behind them, one hand resting on Alara's hip, the other gently brushing a curl from their daughter's forehead. She knows, he said softly. She knows she's loved. That's all that matters. They stood there, a silent, solid unit. The CEO and the nanny, the heir and the heiress. The labels had melted away, leaving only the truth of who they were, partners. Sophie came running in from the playground, her face flushed with joy. Papa, Lara, I did the monkey bars all by myself. She skidded to a halt, beaming up at them, then gently touched her baby sister's hand. The family was complete, not by blood, not by contract, but by choice, by love. The mansion that had once cast Alara out now opened its doors to her warmth. The company that had been built on cold calculation now had a heartbeat. And Liam Kensington, the man who had everything, had finally found the only thing that mattered. A life, built not on power, but on the quiet, unshakable foundation of a second chance. So let me ask you this. What does dignity mean when everything's on the line? Is it holding on when the world pushes you to break? Is it walking away from survival when you finally taste love? Or is it choosing to build something sacred, even when it scares you? In a world that worships power, sometimes the kindest heart holds the greatest inheritance. It's never about the wealth you amass, but the lives you touch. The legacy you leave isn't a name on a building. It's the love you plant in the hearts of others, a garden that continues to grow long after you're gone. If this story moved you even just a little, do me a favor. It helps us tell more stories that matter. Drop a comment below and tell me what you would have done in Alara's shoes. Subscribe to this channel for more powerful storytelling every week. Because here, we don't just tell stories. We tell stories that make you feel, think, and maybe even heal a little. Remember, dignity, kindness, and patience can change destinies. Thank you for watching.